We're going to see John Boehner sworn in here today as the new speaker, one of, what, a dozen children. I'm told 11 of his siblings are here in town. A much different person, comes from a much different background than Nancy Pelosi did. But it seems to me, I mean, I'm sitting here wondering, who's going to have the hardest job here? Is it going to be President Obama, or is it going to be John Boehner, the new speaker, or is it going to be Mitch McConnell, who is the, and I would add into that Harry Reid, the two leaders in the Senate, because you got two very fractious parties here, both on the Republican side and on the Democratic side.
And I think we've already seen with new soon-to-be Speaker Boehner some of the challenges that he's going to be facing. You've got all these new freshman Republicans coming in, obviously considered by many in the party a breath of fresh air, but they have different priorities. The base, the Tea Party, they're very energized. We saw that now that they're planning to vote to repeal health care right out of the box, kind of a pointless vote. There's not a chance that is ever going to get repealed. No. But we've also, there's a movement there to kind of pacify that part of the party, while at the same time we've seen Boehner say, but listen, let's kind of take a breath on these investigations and on congressional oversight of the administration, trying to tone down some of the real, I think, intensity that you see from people in the Republican Party to kind of go after the Obama administration. I think he realizes that that could be a mistake, and that subpoenas and blanketing the White House at this point with the economy so bad may not resonate with voters.
So what happens after we get through this kind of kabuki dance we're going through here, where we vote to repeal health care? And I assume the House will pass that, but there's not a chance in the world that it would ever get approved in the Senate, where the Democrats are still in control. We'll start rolling out these bills to cut spending. They say they're going to cut $100 billion this year. Well, they're talking about something like 20% cuts in things like transportation. Well, that in itself, if they did that, would throw the country into a recession. I mean, when that news hit the various states and the governors trying to deal with stuff like that. So we know they're going to vote on this stuff, but we also know nothing is going to happen, it seems to me. So why are they going through all this, Jeff?
I think Speaker Boehner, to answer your question, he has the hardest job of them because he has the biggest majority and he has to sort of corral all these diverging viewpoints. But you hit the nail on the head with the budgets of the states. The biggest story of the year, I believe, is the budget crisis facing states out there, and they need the federal government's help. Republican members of Congress have the same, amount of governors. In fact, they have more governors out there. So for all the talk of trying to reach this $100 billion mark, they're not going to do it. And Speaker Boehner is going to have to try and find enough pragmatic members of his caucus to sort of, not do everything that they promised at these Tea Party rallies. Governing is harder than campaigning, and he knows it, and he's going to try and find enough like-minded people to, the debt ceiling is another thing. People are talking about, not voting for this. So I think Speaker Boehner has the hardest job.
I agree with that, of course, Jeff, but he's always right. But I think while he has a hard job, he recognizes it. And I think already he's got to get some pretty high marks for some of the leadership he's shown so far. He knows those challenges. He's not throwing parties. He's not acting like Newt Gingrich parading around Washington. I think he recognizes where the American people are in terms of, these serious economic problems.
I agree.
And
we are now, as Brent Musburger would say, we're looking live at the House of Representatives, and in just a bit here, well, it'll be some minutes now, but a little later, John Boehner will take the gavel and will be the new Republican Speaker of the House. The House is a fun place. I mean, if you're a reporter, it's just fun to see them in action because they're all there. They know they're going to be there for only 2 years or might get beat. So they're just constantly running for re-election. But interesting things happen. I wonder really, at the end of this congressional, well, let's just say at the end of this year, what do you all think will have happened? Is there any way to predict what is going to happen? I mean, real stuff, not just making speeches about repealing health care. Is there any chance that the health care reform will be modified? Will it be changed? Is there parts of it that will be kept? I mean, I think the whole thing is there. I don't think the votes are there to repeal health care.
I think some changes may be done, like in the rule-making things, what these agencies do on health care. I think they may try and sort of make it more palatable, but more than anything, they're going to try and keep selling health care. I think there will be something that comes out in something like education reform or tax reform. Speaker Boehner and his Republicans have incentive to get something done. They want to show some progress, even if it's some small things, as opposed to, you know, just passing everything in the House and then it doesn't get passed in the Senate. Voters don't care. The whole House-Senate thing, oh, blame it on the Senate. That doesn't work back home. I think they will try and get something done, maybe on education or tax reform.
And I mean, I hate to bring in the third branch here, but I think when we talk about health care, you cannot forget that there are serious, real challenges going on in federal courts right now.
Absolutely.
And it's always really fascinating, I think, when you think about the political branches. So often they'll pass laws to kind of appease the public and think, well, you know, the courts will deal with that and, you know, we'll be fine. But I think this is one where if the courts strike down key components of healthcare reform, that's going to be a very serious challenge for both parties. Because it's one thing for the House to say, well, let's you know, take this kind of symbolic vote to do away with the healthcare bill, but what are you going to replace it with? That's a whole nother difficult question that I'm not sure either party wants to get into right now. But if it's struck down, or at least the mandatory pay provisions, they may have to.
Well, that is a very interesting point indeed. And what you're seeing on your screens now is the beginning of the process to nominate John Boehner to be the next Speaker of the House. When that happens, of course, Nancy Pelosi will be there and she will actually hand the gavel over. I mean, there'll be some forced smiles all around. I remember when Gephardt handed that gavel over to Newt Gingrich, and everybody was trying to smile, but they were having a hard
politely
time. Yeah, and no,
so it wasn't like the Supreme Court justice at the State of the Union.
But
where
you know,
they sit
Jan,
there.
I mean, this conversation, we're touching all points here. I want to ask you one thing when you brought up the Supreme Court. Do you think the justices will come back for the President's State of the Union message this year?
You know, I've talked with many of them about this, and they really haven't decided. I think some will definitely show up. You know, Justice Breyer, there are a couple that they just like to go. You know, they like the whole spectacle of it. But I don't think you'll see Justice Alito there, who, of course, famously last year said not true when the President kind of lashed out at them about their campaign finance reform decision. I'd be surprised if you see Justice Thomas, Justice Scalia, some of the conservative justices.
What about the Chief?
That's
Does the Chief have to go?
You read my mind. I mean, that's the hardest question, because the Chief Justice is in this unusual position where, as kind of the leader of that court, who doesn't want it to appear like a political branch, if only the liberal justices go, then that could be seen as a political decision. So that might force his hand and he'll decide to go. Although I'm telling you what, he does not want to. I mean, he's criticized that whole debacle at a speech at the University of Alabama back in the spring.
But he's doing something interesting this week as well. He's swearing in Speaker Boehner's staff. Has that been done before?
Not to my knowledge. I think that's very unusual. And of course, this is part of this effort that we're seeing now in this new Congress to really go back, I think, fueled by the Tea Party, to kind of go back to the Constitution, the first principles, cite the constitutional basis for any new legislation. That's going to be very difficult for some of these congressmen to do when they're tossing out new legislation. So you've got staffs of lawyers at outside groups trying to help them come up with constitutional provisions. Roberts, I think, has gotten some criticism for that, saying that might make it look like the court is too political. He, of course, would say, well, this is about the Constitution.
What are the big cases the court's going to be dealing with?
Well, Bob, this is one of those
other than the Supreme Court, health care.
This is one of those terms where, and it may not get to the Supreme Court. The big cases that are out there that we're all kind of waiting on probably won't get to the court this term. That would be health care. That would be the Arizona immigration law. Remember that huge debate that would inject the court into a national immigration policy issue that Congress really hasn't adequately addressed. Those are probably a year away. So I think this year we've got some big cases. There's a big class action lawsuit, whether or not hundreds of thousands of women can sue Walmart for sex discrimination, for example. But I think we're going to see the court take a back seat this year to Congress and the White House on the big stories of the day. I don't expect a retirement this year. Of course, we had back-to-back retirements in the past 2 years. But, you know, you never know. You never know. That's the thing about covering the court. They can surprise you sometimes.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about the politics and presidential politics. When are we going to start seeing candidates announced? This is the year when, if they're going to run, they generally do announce. I've said for a long time I thought Newt Gingrich would probably be the first Republican to announce, but I'd be interested, Jeff, in what you think and what you see coming.
Well, it seems early, but 4 years ago, next week, both Senator Obama and Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton formed their presidential exploratory committees and announced. So Republicans are not going to be quite as quick this time out of the box. For one reason is raising money is the biggest hurdle, and if you announce now, that means you're going to be judged by how much money you raised in the whole first quarter. So I look for most of the announcements to happen in a March this year, at the end of the first quarter of the year. But I was, right before Christmas, I was with Speaker Gingrich down in South Carolina. He was giving a speech in Spartanburg, so I thought I'd go check in on him, and he told me that he is going to make a decision in February. He is as close to running as he ever has been. But if you sort of go back through history, every 4 years, really since he left the House, he said that at the end of the day, I'm not sure if this is about a real run or if this is about just getting his name out there. But he'll certainly be one of the contenders. Mitt Romney has already formed a team, the former governor of Massachusetts, Governor Tim Pawlenty from Minnesota. His book comes out next week. So those are some of the names.
That's a good reason to run.
Sarah Palin is the person we've not really heard from all year. It's a question that we don't know when she's going to make her decision. I think it'll be later in the year.
What would you, if you had to guess, and right now we're all just guessing, you think she's going to run?
At the end of the day, I find it hard to get my mind around her deciding to run because she has it so good now. She can send out a text message on her Twitter and she gets all this coverage. If she becomes a serious candidate, she will have to stand next to her fellow candidates at a debate and take criticism. That's something that we've never really seen her do, take criticism. So at the end of the day, I think she has a pretty good thing going for her. I'm not sure why she would mess it up. But
isn't that the reason?
What do you think,
Well,
Jim?
I mean, I think the reason that no one has any idea what Sarah Palin is going to do is because we are, assuming that when you're analyzing this, you can't assume that Sarah Palin thinks like we do or like another person does. I mean, who would have thought that as governor of Alaska, she would think, well, yeah, I should be vice president. So, I mean, at the same time, you could say she's got it really good and she's got this huge audience and she can do Facebook postings and go on another book tour and do all the media she wants, and including a TV show, up in Alaska while she's shooting, moose or bear or whatever.
Cleaning fish.
But you don't know what Sarah Palin, I think, is an unpredictable figure, and that's what makes her so fascinating.